count one, it says, "We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, George Washington Wagner IV, is guilty of aggravated murder as charged in count one of the indictment."
All right, welcome back to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm Michelle Yu. We turn our attention now to what you just saw, Pike County, Ohio, where a verdict was reached in the trial of George Wagner IV. Wagner was found guilty on all 22 criminal counts, including 8 counts of aggravated murders for the execution-style deaths of 7 members of the Rhoden family and Hannah Gilley. The jury reached their verdict after a little more than 7 hours of deliberations. Wagner now faces life in prison. His sentencing is scheduled for December 14th. And our very own Angenette Levy is live with us right now. And Angenette, what can you tell us about this verdict? Were you surprised at all by the jury's decision here?
You know, not entirely, Michelle. There was a lot stacked against George Wagner IV. Of course, he maintained he wasn't even there that night, but his brother Jake and his mother Angela, they both turned against him and testified against him and said that he was a part of this plan. Jake Wagner was testified against his brother and said that his brother was there that night when they carried out these homicides and that he didn't fire a shot. But it didn't matter because in the state of Ohio, if you're complicit in something, if you aided and abetted, and that's what the jury found George Wagner IV did, that he aided and abetted his father, mother, and brother in these crimes, then you're just as guilty as if you pulled the trigger yourself. So I wasn't completely surprised. The jury heard 10 weeks of testimony. That's a lot of testimony. It was a lot to sit through. You could tell they were getting tired. And so they only deliberated for about 7 hours, maybe 7.5 hours, including their lunch break. So it didn't take long given everything they had heard. After the verdicts, for the first time in years and years and years, probably 6 years or so, we actually heard from the Rhoden family. So let's listen as Tony Rhoden talks about his family's feelings after hearing those guilty verdicts.
I would like to start by saying I would like to thank the citizens of Pike County. I would like to thank the citizens of the state of Ohio for bearing this burden that should have never happened to this family in Southern Ohio.
Just commenting, Tony, about how the relationship seemed to be one of affection between the Wagners and at least your brother Chris and so forth. What do you make of all this madness?
You said the word.
Madness.
Madness.
What did you feel when you heard the first guilty verdict? What was going through your mind, and anyone else you'd care to comment?
I feel sorry for him.
Why is that? Why?
Because he is human.
How do you find the humanity at a time like this when he did so much to your family?
I think we all have human in us. There's just a difference in us.
Tony, what did your mom say?
That's between us.
Okay.
Tony, this has been such a long, awful road for you all. I'm sure you're feeling a lot of emotions, but can you give us any sense of what you're feeling just right now?
A little bit of peace. We still have a long road to go. We'll get there. Because we are family.
And really, it was really amazing to hear Tony Rhoden offering some grace and some empathy to George Wagner IV after what he was found guilty of doing, killing not only Tony Rhoden's 2 brothers, Chris Rhoden Sr. and Kenneth Rhoden, but also Hannah Mae Rhoden, his niece, his nephews, Chris Rhoden Jr. and Clarence Frankie Rhoden, his fiancee Hannah Hazel Gilley, and then of course Chris Rhoden Sr.'s ex-wife Dana Rhoden. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning to hear this family who's been through so much and whose lives were really shattered years and years ago when this happened, offer that grace to George Wagner IV when they probably could have said a lot more and expressed a lot of anger. And I really think that a lot of people may not understand the true gravity of what happened in this case. You're not seeing the autopsy photos, the crime scene photos. It's absolutely horrific what was done to this family. And we also heard for the first time in about 4 years from the prosecution team in this case. There's been a gag order in this case, and really they haven't spoken at all since the Wagners were arrested in November of 2018. So let's listen as Pike County Prosecutor Rob Junk and Special Prosecutor Angie Canepa address the Rhoden families and family members and the guilty verdicts.
express my greatest sympathy to the Manley, Rhoden, and Gilly families. They stuck with us through the whole investigation, through the whole trial. We don't get that level of cooperation. I apologize. From every victim's family we deal with, and I just want to say we appreciate everything you have done for us and sticking with us. Good won today, and evil lost.
And of course, I would like to echo Rob's comments about the family. You guys have trusted us with your lives and the lives of your loved ones. And I know today's verdict does not bring your loved ones back. I know that. But I do hope that it gives you some semblance of peace that yet another one of the evil monsters that did this to your family has been held accountable.
And prosecutors maintained throughout this case that this was all over custody of a little girl that Jake Wagner shared with Hannah Mae Rhoden. We heard testimony about how this family wanted custody of that child. And prosecutors say that they justified carrying out these homicides by conjuring up this false fear and this false claim that the little girl could possibly, and I emphasize possibly, be molested. So it's a horrifying, horrifying thing that happened. And the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, actually addressed the verdicts after they were read. He had his own press conference last night, and he was the attorney general when this case happened, when the murders took place, and he oversaw the investigation up until the arrests and the indictments. So let's listen to what Governor Mike DeWine had to say, praising Ohio's Bureau of Criminal Investigation for their work in this case.
All law enforcement that was involved in this very difficult and complicated case. I want to thank the BCI agents, the investigators, the analysts, forensic scientists, and crime victim advocates. They solved these crimes. They assisted the family. They helped uncover nearly 5,000 pieces of evidence. They put this case together. They figured out what at times seemed like such an implausible motive, the custody of a child, the murder of 8 innocent people.
And really, there was evidence in this case that came about and was discovered, kind of slowly. They discovered these 8 people murdered on April 22nd of 2016, and there were really no clues about this. There were some shell casings at the scene, but a lot of them had been cleaned up and taken. There were some shoe prints. Really, that was it as far as evidence that was found at the crime scenes. They then went on to go through social media accounts of the victims. They discovered a possible motive with the Wagner family. They saw that there was a custody dispute brewing. Then they went on to track the family, interview them. They got wiretaps, and there were a lot of very interesting and somewhat disturbing conversations on those wiretaps. George Wagner IV, of course, though, maintaining that he knew nothing about this. Didn't know his family was involved. He said he thought they were all being framed until after his brother pleaded guilty. Obviously, the jury not buying his testimony. Michelle?
Well, Angenette, one more thing I wanted to ask you when you talk about the Wagner family. There is still one more outstanding case, and that's Billy Wagner. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Billy Wagner is the father of George Wagner IV and Jake, the husband of Angela Wagner. Jake Wagner testified, and Angela Wagner testified as well, that this whole idea of murdering the Rhodens over this custody issue was Billy Wagner's idea. So we heard from Billy Wagner in the trial only because his interview with investigators was played, and that was another thing that sparked their suspicion. Things that he said in that interview kind of raised their eyebrows a little bit and got their antennas up. His trial is expected to begin next year. He's not taken a deal. He has no leverage now to take a deal or to even offer anything. You've got 3 convictions now, so he's the last man standing. So he is expected to go to trial. We will let you know, of course, if that changes, but everything we've been told is that he's going to trial. The prosecution is ready to go to trial, and so we'll just wait and see when that trial date is set. It's expected next year, 2023.
And Angenette, you've covered this trial since the very beginning, doing such a fantastic job. Take us through what that courtroom was like. Paint us a picture of how the emotions were when the judge read that verdict.
Well, you know, I think anytime a verdict is read, it's a little bit tense. But I think the Rhoden family and the Manley families, I think they were hopeful. They watched the trial. They were there every day. And as soon as the first guilty verdict was read on that first aggravated murder count, you heard some kind of gasps and kind of crying, you know, a sigh of relief of sorts. And I looked over and I could see Geneva Rhoden, the matriarch of this family, the mother and grandmother of these victims, sitting there with her children, her surviving children, listening as those 22 guilty verdicts were read. And you could see some of the family members, you know, just sobbing. They were relieved. And it was, you know, a lot for them to take in. I tried to speak with a couple of them afterwards. Some of them did speak with us. Others were they were just too upset, but they were just overcome with emotion. And George Wagner IV, you could probably see, he just kind of blinked a couple of times, just very slightly. So no emotion shown from him at all.